I have dedicated my professional career in ministry to serving as an interim for congregations between settled ministers. This moment, as I stand here before you, is one of the most treasured moments in my experience of that ministry. It's the moment when I share with you the heart of your church. The heart. You don't have the slide, but the graphic on the cover of your order of service shows you in small frame the word cloud that was developed from the heart of the church exercise that we did on Sunday, September 9th. You see, last year's exercise up there, that was the gifts that you bring, with love at the center, but lots of gifts that you bring from your presence and your participation here, love and commitment and joy, humor, curiosity, gratitude, empathy, compassion, caring, and service. One of the things I do as an interim minister is watch over the next year to see whether I see these gifts being given, these gifts that people say that they're bringing to the church. And it is always so gratifying, as it is here, to know that people really do bring these gifts to the church. But this year, the topic is what is at the heart of the church. And so we did an exercise bringing values. You said what values you thought were at the heart of the church. And those values, love again, central to this church and its ministry within the walls and outside in the larger community. Love, justice, and caring community, acceptance, openness, inclusion, respect, and welcome. And if your eyes are really good, you can probably see some more of the words that are on the cover of today's order of service. And we're going to have this graphic made available to you in various ways over the next few weeks, because these values are important, and they are who you are. 2 years ago, the board developed from a series of conversations with all of you, not only new end statements, statements about how the church envisions itself to be, the church being all of you, and those are the guidelines that we on the staff and the larger we, the volunteers who do the ministry of this congregation, those are the guidelines for what we do, what we decide to do. But the mission that the board developed said, together we experience wonder, grow connections, live and love generously, and nurture a more just world. During a transition, during a ministerial transition, when there isn't a senior minister in place and the new senior minister hasn't even been identified yet, it's an important time for the congregation to have a chance to say what it thinks is important about the church, what it thinks the church's values are, what it thinks the church's visions are. We rely on the members during this transition to say what the mission of this church should be. And it's a lot like the process that the board used 2 years ago, but it's done in the absence of the beloved minister. And it makes a difference sometimes. I think we will see over the next few months whether the mission statement that emerges from this process is different or not. My guess is that it's going to be very similar, but there are some new wrinkles that I got to see in the visioning process that we have been doing here. And I want to tell you about them. We had, in February and March, we had 26 visioning circles. And those circles asked people 5 questions, and 200 people participated, answering those questions. Scribes took notes, so that means that we had about 1,000 responses to the questions that were asked. And in the visioning workshop that happened yesterday, 50 of your closest friends, some of you, who was here at the visioning workshop? Anyone take part? Yes, a lot of you did. So we had 50 members take part, and they sorted through those 1,000 responses, because even though we can get a pretty good idea from a word cloud of what might be the main values or the main ideals of a church community, it's only through the analysis of more detailed responses that we can actually build, it's possible to build then a mission statement, as well as a clearer idea of what the vision is that the members of this congregation have for the ministry of the church, for the way this church is to be in the world, both holding its current membership, any newcomers who arrive, and as it reaches out to the world. So basically, we had 50 members spend 4 hours analyzing these 1,000 responses. And so that's 200 person hours. For one person, that would be, if one person were doing this analysis, that's 5 40-hour work weeks. So that's the amount of attention and effort that has gone into this process. And of course, it's better than having just one person do the work, because one person reads everything through the filter of their own experience and their own perspective. We had groups of either 8 or 9 people sitting around tables, and they followed this process that was intended to make sure that the end results, the conclusions that the group as a whole drew about the vision and values and mission of this congregation were informed by many different perspectives and by a collaborative process of discussion and agreement. The groups of 8 or 9 started in pairs to look at each question that was asked during the visioning circles and look at the responses. We divided the responses in 2 so that groups were working with 100 responses each rather than 200. They had to distill what was important about those 100 responses to each of the questions. And then the pairs had to make a list of 4 items that they thought was most important, and then get together with another pair, so there were 4 of them, and they had to whittle down what might have been a list of 8, back to a list of 4. And then the table as a whole had to compare the new list of 4 that each group had at the table and come up again with a list of 4 out of the possible 8 that they could agree on. So it was a reiterative process of discussion in pairs, then as quads, then as a table of 8 or 9. And I can't show you the slides, but I just want to say, they started with values, and we put them up, we were in Channing Hall, we put them up on the windows. And so pretty soon there was a window wall that had 6 groups worth of what the 4 values are that are at the heart of the church. And it was amazing. I, as the workshop facilitator, was in a position of reading each list as it went up, and I got chills as the list went up. There are a lot of similarities in each list. There's a lot of convergence, a lot of agreement on what values are at the heart of the church. And those values that were listed weren't too much different from what you see in the heart design on the cover of your order of service. But the values kind of is the framework for everything that follows. After they did, the group worked on values, they looked at the responses to people were asked, what do you appreciate about the church? What do you long for? What insights do you have when you think about what you appreciate and what you long for? And people were asked, finally, to share a story about what made the church important to them. And these personal stories are moving. They talk about arriving maybe in a state of sadness or grief after a loss, a divorce, some kind of traumatic experience, and being welcomed into community. They talk about longing to make a difference in the world and being invited to participate in social justice advocacy or service. They talk about longing for relationships and connection and how they found friends in our Soul Matters group. Or a story about longing to create more meaning in their lives, and here finding an opportunity to do that. These are your stories. Each one of you here may well have a story like that, something that connected you and made this church important to you. And for first-time visitors or newcomers here who don't have those stories can be your stories too. Because one of the things that came through clearly was the warmth and the welcome and the desire, however imperfect the execution may be, but the desire to be truly welcoming, hospitable, inclusive to everyone we meet, to anyone who comes through the doors. So I've got on my iPad, so you can't read these, I understand, but I wanted to share, I thought some of the most moving and inspirational conclusions that the group came from the answers, the distillation of the answers to the question, what is important about the church? So here's one group's response. Engagement and celebration of all ages, all stages of life. The idea of welcome home, welcoming, embracing, and supporting people here. Growth through meaningful programs for children and adults. The value of personal stories, sharing, and listening. Another group distilled these important things about the church. That here people treasure and invest in children and youth. Obviously, our whole lives, the OWL sexuality education program, the coming of age program, our early childhood programs for children, and the youth group, and the tremendous meaning that the church comes to have in the lives of our high school youth, as you hear every year during the service where the high school youth present their thoughts about what their time here has meant as they go off to the next stage of their lives. The group also said that what's important is compassionate and respectful community open to vulnerability and differences. Now, I have really seen this congregation work on that thing, that idea of being compassionate and respectful and being open to differences. It's in two ways. One is the differences that come from the differences that people bring, because none of us are the same. Unitarian churches and Universalist churches began with a focus on being open to theological difference. And over time, we've come to understand theological difference to be much broader than just the differences that people might have within Christianity. Instead, we have created an interfaith community here and in our Unitarian Universalist congregations across the country. It also means being open to and respectful toward differences of opinion within our community. A sense of belonging and support, leading to a feeling of home. So there's that home idea again. That people are invited to discover and engage in new and shared passions. Surprises and the unexpected leading to joy, awe, and wonder. Sunday services that challenge the heart and mind, an inviting community that cares about one another, congregational commitment to nurturing our children, small group opportunities, meaningful life rituals. And then another group said, intentional welcoming, a place for all. UU values for children and youth, services and sermons, and a caring community that meets personal needs within the walls. So there is so much more that came out of this workshop, and that we'll make the notes from the workshop available to you online. So check the email intercom that goes out each Friday. We'll have a link to that. I hope we can get them up by next Friday, but if it's not, then check the next week. Because the thing about these flip chart lists that the groups came up with is that they are inspirational. By the time the workshop was over, we had the walls filled. One wall had values, and then another wall had what's important and what we appreciate, what we long for. And then another wall was filled with goals. And the last thing we invited the groups to do, and not all groups had enough time, but we invited them to come up with some ideas about mission. If it was just 3 things in a mission, what would they be? And it was so inspirational to feel that as I stood there, I was surrounded by the values of this community. And what I have seen in the last year is that you are doing your best to live those values. When the Board of Trustees says it wants to have a more transparent process, and people here feel that maybe they haven't done that in making a particular decision, the board decides to hold a special meeting. That happened just this last week. It is not about living these values and living these goals for the community perfectly, because human beings are imperfect and our human community will always be imperfect. But we can identify what we're working towards, what our aspirations are. And when we make a mistake, we can acknowledge it. We can begin again in love. And fundamental to this is a respectful treatment of every human being in this community as we disagree. At the special board meeting, there was a wonderful moment when one member had expressed an opinion, and another member stood up and said, she said the name of the member who had just spoken, and said, "I love you, but I disagree with you." And then explained her point of view, and when she was done, the first member said, "I love you too." And it was, people can disagree passionately about things, but still understand that love is at the center of this church. And it means that we always aspire to treat each one another with respect and to let the love and the awareness that we're not perfect and we will make mistakes allow us to be somewhat patient with one another as we go forward to explore the reasons for our differences and to decide together what happens next. As I stood in the center of this amazing set of walls, hearing the burble of conversation and reading the values and the goals and the purposes that people were finding in all of those responses, 1,000 responses, it was easy to see some convergence around 3 big picture areas. First, for individuals to inspire lifelong personal and spiritual growth. Among church members, friends, and newcomers, create a welcoming, inclusive, and diverse community, diverse in all senses of the word. And third, in the wider world, to nurture justice, that means both advocacy and service. And one group used the word witness to make a more just community. Witness means we're paying attention to what's going on in the world, and we're taking our values from within these walls out into the wider community. And one of the groups, reflecting on the three areas that they'd identified, this personal growth and the community sense and feeling, that home feeling, and justice in the wider world, added this little thought. In all of these endeavors, we should create opportunities to experience joy, wonder, and awe. Yes. So the next steps, there's a mission and vision drafting group that will be formed under the leadership of two transition team members. Heidi Levine and Jean Ramos are the co-leaders. There will be a strategic task force that will focus on the goals that are drawn from the values and what's important, all the material developed in the workshop. And the strategic planning task force will start to consult with people about the goals and about what steps we might take to reach them. What I see happening here, with a kind of passion and energy that is really both something I see in transition ministry, but also at a level that's actually rather rare. This deep dive that these 50 members took into your values and your ideas about what makes the church important was incredibly inspirational to me. And it illustrates the love that I have seen at the heart of this church. And the love that is at the heart inspires lifelong personal and spiritual growth. It encourages people to create a welcoming, diverse, compassionate community. And it motivates people to carry these values beyond our walls to create a more just and humane world. Now that is the kind of church I want to be part of. And I am grateful that I've had a year and I've got another year to be with you and experience the way that you live into these values with your energy and your passion and your occasional quarrelsomeness, and most of all, your love. Marge Piercy said, "It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do. It starts when you do it again and they said no. It starts when you say we and you know who you mean. And each day you mean one more." The heart of your church.